Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this late summer webinar of museumexpert.org. I hope you all had a great vacation and ready to go again for an exciting year in the museum business. We have a fantastic panel with European colleagues today. As we have announced, we know that over time, over the last years, pandemic has affected museums in very different ways in the US and in Europe. And I think it's interesting for everyone to learn about each other. And so that's why we're very excited to hear what happened in Europe and and share that with our American colleagues today and Europeans as there are as well. So thank you again for joining. I have an exciting panel. They will introduce themselves in a second. But let me just give you a few words of introduction about museumexpert.org for those who may not know us as an organization. So originally, I created Museum Expert during the pandemic because in the US, at least, thousands, if not 10,000s of museum professionals had lost their jobs. And of course, it was not their responsibility. They had done nothing wrong. They were still good colleagues. They were very good professionals. It just circumstances made that financially it was impossible for museums to stay open the way they had been before, and they had to lay off 10,000s of people. And at the same time, keeping some basic activities going. When you are a zoo, you cannot just decide to close a zoo. Of course, that's obvious. But even science centers or other museums with collections needs to stay open, at least for minimum activity. And what was striking to me was that museums had so-called laid off too many people. They were not able to do actually the basic stuff that they needed to be doing. And so I thought that there was an opportunity to bring employers together with museum professionals that were out of work for short-time activities and small contracts and temporary things, so that they would be responding to what the immediate needs are, and museums, people out of work would have the opportunity to continue working in the field. And so we created this platform where people and employers and professionals could get together and find ways to find jobs for each other. So this was the very beginning, and very quickly from discussing with people, we had hundreds of people immediately part of that, willing to do that. But it was very clear from the beginning that there was need for more than just this connection between potential employers. And so we needed to help people rebuild their careers. How can you actually go back in the field when you have been laid off for so long? How do you actually respond to a call for a job? What do you do in a video interview? What do you do after? How do you write a letter? And all of these things were very important. And we have started doing webinars with that on that theme to help people actually being prepared to go back into the workforce. And at the same time, we realized that there were so many changes happening in the field that we also needed to follow up on what the changes were, so that people, when they want to go back into the field, would be up to date with the changes, that they were not just trying to go back to a place in the same way they were before, because that was not going to happen, no way. And so that evolved over time for us to be more and more interested in what it means to have a career in the museum. And we saw big changes in the hiring practices in the museums in the US. They were looking for different skills, different type of people, and those who were laid off were not necessarily rehired. So there was a big change, a big transformation in that regard. And so we have been watching this and noticing the big stress that was starting to create among the workforce in the museum over time, because of a lot of reasons, and including, of course, the big changes from the pandemic, but also the big different views that museum leaders have about what they want, where they want to go with their institution next. And so that's where we stand today. We like to work with the museums now to see how to create a workplace community that actually is inclusive and help and involves everyone working there in thinking about the strategies for the future and how to act as a place that serves the community outside as well. So that's where we stand. And I have followed a little bit what's going on in Europe, and I know some things were similar and others are not. So what we like to do today is going over these topics with our esteemed colleagues from Europe, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves uh, very briefly first, their name, what their position is, and what the institution is that they are working in, so that we are all up to speed with our panelists, and then we can start the conversation after that. So welcome to all of you. I will start from north to south and from east to west. So I'm going to start with Anne in Sweden. Anne, please introduce yourself. And
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. I'm Anne Follin. I'm Director General for the National Museums of World Culture in Sweden, and that means that I run 4 national museums, 3 in Stockholm and 1 in Gothenburg. And I've been in the museum business for all my life, very long time. I've also been the former director for the National Museum of Science and Technology here in Sweden. I think I stopped there.
Okay, for now. Thank you. So then we go to the Netherlands, Marjolein. Oh, you're muted still.
Yes, I should be used to that by now. I'm director of, currently I'm director of the museum at Naturalis Biodiversity Center, which is the National Natural History Museum in the Netherlands. And during COVID, I was in the board of directors of Nemo Science Museum, which is the biggest science center in the Netherlands and Amsterdam.
Thank you. Jörg. Thanks for joining, Jörg.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jörg Etraber. I'm director of basically a children's museum in Graz in Austria called Frieda and Fred. But we are also running a science center since now 2019. It's called COSA, Center of Science Activities. And we are running also a fairy tale train in the city of Graz. And we just opened a month ago a new music museum dedicated to an Austrian composer, Robert Stolz, as a music museum. So that was what I'm doing now since here in Graz for more than around 20 years.
Thank you. Alessandra from Naples.
Hello, I'm Alessandra Drioli from Città della Scienza in Naples, and I'm responsible for the Science Center of Città della Scienza, and I work here since now 25 years, and I also teach at the University of Naples and museum management.
Thank you. Finally, Maria in Portugal.
Hello, I'm Maria Vlachu. I'm a founding member and executive director of Acesso Cultura, Access Culture. We're a cultural organization that works on physical, social, and intellectual access to cultural participation. So our members are cultural professionals and cultural organizations. And this year we celebrate our 10th anniversary.
Thank you so much. So let's start then with the first question, first part of our conversation. As I said in the beginning, we know that museums have gone through COVID in different ways, and certainly between the US and Europe. What we are interested now is how will you describe what happened in your museum?
Walter is frozen. Maybe we can continue with the conversation. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can start if you like. I could say that we, of course, was very strongly affected by the COVID, even if Sweden as a nation chose a different and initially very controversial and questioned strategy. that didn't involve a strict lockdown, as you know. The ambition was to stress the citizens' responsibility and protect the fragile population, but try to keep the social functions and society open as much as possible. Primary school, for instance. But then with restrictions. The culture institutions, the museums, the opera houses, theaters took a really huge responsibility, I would say. We were closed down for too long a periods, and when we was reopened, it was with restrictions in the number of visitors. So in my huge museum could be to enter 50 people at a time. And it was very provocative to see crowded shopping malls and then empty museums. And before the pandemic, Swedish museums had about 28 million visitors annually, physical visitors. And the first year it dropped down to the half, but the number of digital visits raised to 200 million quite quickly. So the pandemic hit the different museums very differently. The Vasa Museum, one of the most famous museums in Stockholm with 90% external international tourists, all their income dropped. And some museums and state museums were compensated, supported from the government, and others were not. My institution, we dropped and lost about 75% of our revenue. And we had to go into a very tough situation to change the whole organization. It affected 40% of the staff, and we also had to dismiss about 8%. And then, of course, all the other kind of strategies that we gone through.
So you had to lay off 8%? Did you say you have to lay off 8% of your staff, is what you said?
Yes, we did. And then, of course, hourly employees' contract was terminated even before that. But that was of the long-term staff. And then, of course, we also had to change. So people working in the front desk worked with the digitalization project, with the metadata setting in the collections database. So we could use the staff in other part of the organization, and that was really useful and helpful in many ways. But it's been a very tough situation to go through for the whole organization, I would say. And of course, that we can't take in new or recruit again to the old positions. But maybe you can come back to that later.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you started a digitalization program, and a lot of people were actually visiting online. So how quick can you transform that? How quick could you respond to the need for online activities, and what is the reality of that today?
Yes, I think we were very quick on the track. I think we closed the museum on Friday and had an online program, a digital tour on Wednesday, the week after. But as I have an organization working in different parts of the country, so we were quite well adapted to digital methods and ways of working already before. We also wrote a strategy, the Museum of World Culture's strategy in a digital world. So we could see that we have transformed and made real a lot of the things that we thought should take much longer time. So this was a really digital acceleration, a boost.
Yeah. So that's what we see in general, is that museums were already somehow having digital activities and online activities, and that the pandemic has just made it explode. But they were actually ready, most of them, to actually respond to that. So thank you. I'm going to go to Marjolaine now for her story, pandemic story.
Yeah, so I was working at the Science Museum, NEMO, at the time, and we had quite strong lockdowns. So I think in 2020 we had to lock down. I actually looked it up, around 19 weeks. The year after it was 24 weeks, and even in 22 we had to lock down in the beginning of the year for a few months. Until March, I think. So it was quite extreme. And in the whole of the Netherlands, there was a decrease of 64% of visitors in the first year compared to 2019, and then another decrease in the year after. And in the same situation, I think in Sweden and maybe, I guess, internationally, is that all the international tourists stopped coming. And that was a very extreme increase of 86% less for the Dutch museums. And that had a huge impact on all museums and all cultural institutes. In our situation, we were at the museum I work for is a stately funded museum, but a very low percentage. So only 20%, 80% was revenues, own revenues. So we had to really respond very quickly and quite extremely. So we cut all costs day one and had to lay off all freelancers. And then we started a reorganization almost straight away, because we calculated that we would be bankrupt within 1 year or 1.5 years. So we started reorganization within a few months. So we had to close down in March. By July, we finished off our reorganization plans. And then, of course, we had to negotiate this with staff. And then by September, we had to lay off people. And by that time, by the time we had to lay off people, so it was around 25-30% of our staff we had to lay off. We actually got support only after that. So we already laid off quite a lot of people. So in the Netherlands, the situation was different. Well, it was insecure for every museum, also the stately funded, of course. But because our income was, our own revenues were relatively so high, we had to respond very extremely compared to other museums in the Netherlands. And when you also look at the support, it really depends on where your museum is. So is it stately funded nationally, or through the province, or through the city, or not funded? There you see a completely different situation of how well off they are now, or after the lockdowns in COVID. So they all had to respond quite differently to the situation. So I would say it really depends on your situation in your museum in the Netherlands.
And that's the big difference that we see between Europe mostly and then the US, where the US is more in your situation, where 80% is, if not more, is coming from the self-revenue, revenue at the door, sponsorship and things like that, not from government or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Besides the Smithsonian, of course.
Yes, and the museum I work for now, the percentage is much higher. So they didn't have to lay off anyone.
Yeah.
Except freelancers, and they had to cut a lot of costs, but they didn't have to do any layoffs. So it's a very different situation.
What we have seen here, and from what Anne says and what you say, you have to cut costs. And what we have seen here is the costs that have been cut is in education, but not in other aspects of it. So mostly in education and programming that the cuts have been done. Is that the same for you, Anne and Marjolaine?
Not necessarily. I would say we did have a very, well, at NEMO, because our own revenues are so important, we had very serious discussions about what is nice to have and what is really necessary. So in the beginning, we had a very serious discussion about how could we, when we reopen, really restart getting revenues, because it was so important for us. And so also when you look at, for instance, staffs and programs, we only spend money on to make sure that if we reopen, we could actually get our visitors flow back on. So we would, for instance, spend money on marketing, right? So I guess that depended, and also in our situation, lots of our education programs were funded through other schemes, so through projects, European projects, or through external funders, not government funders. So we could actually continue many of our education programs.
Okay, good. Nicely. What is your COVID story?
My story maybe is, of course, for part the same and a little bit different, of course, like in all European countries, I would say. In general, we were closed 4 times. First time, of course, from March 2020 for around 3 months, then again in October, and then again in 21 in end of December 20 to 21 February, and then I mean, yeah, this 4 times. And the last time it was end of November 2021 to December 21. And I think our situation was a little bit different because we are funded by the city of Graz. Of course, we have our own income also by entrance fees and, of course, to our traveling exhibition and so on. Of course, that went down, but we didn't have to lay off any staff member because the situation in Austria was that the government has a program, of course, of short-time work for all people in different companies in Austria. So we got a lot of funding by the Austrian government, and the how to say, the stupid situation was that at the end of the year we had a better financial situation as we expected for that year, because the fact was, of course, the money was coming for all the stuff, which was also paid normally by the government of the city of Graz, was now paid by the Austrian government. And so financial wise and for the staff, I mean, for their jobs, it was not a difficult situation. It was more, of course, about losing visitors and stopping with exhibition and all that. And that was the same for all the cultural institutions. So there was a big discussion if the museums and the theaters have to repay money back to the government, because all of these institutions had a better financial year that they expected. So that was really something like a stupid thing of the situation. Because the compensation of that money because we are, of course, a very personal driven institution. So we have a lot of people working in the museum, in the exhibition with our visitors. And because of the fact that these people were paid by the government and not by the city of Graz, we had this positive impact, to say positive in that connection.
So tell me then, your staff, you didn't lay off anybody, but there were no visitors. So what were these people doing?
This is called short-time work in Austria. That means this is in general a tool which is existing if a company has troubles. That there is the possibility that the government pays 80%. The only thing is that the staff members had to agree that they only will get 80% of their salary. But they stayed at home and were waiting for always in the lockdown. Of course, we worked together on projects, on programs, on ideas, but in general, they were fully paid or 80% paid, but we didn't lose any staff member at that time.
Okay, that's great. So what I was wondering so what kind of work did you do with the people who were from home. We said you worked on projects and plans and so on. So is there anything concrete that came out of that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in the first lockdown, I think we were really, how to say, impacted by the situation that we had to find a strategy how to work together. So because we were not prepared, I have to say that every staff member had a laptop to work from at home, because of course we had everything offered in the offices. So we had to find a workflow at the beginning. But of course, later on, then when we were prepared for the second lockdown, we started, of course, to prepare on online formats. So we did programs for the parents, something like discussion formats like this one. We organized small workshops for around 15 children could take part in with activities. So we had something like that we prepared in the museum or at home, a workstation where they could do programs with us, but we were not able. This was the only thing. Of course, the Children's Museum is a very interactive organization, so we are working with interactive exhibits, and we didn't find it makes no sense something like to have a guided tour through our museum to show the interactive exhibits. This is totally different to other museums who had, of course, a collection, and they did immediately a walk through their collection. So we try. I will talk about that later. We tried last year something like an online format of our exhibition, but this was not able to do that fast, because we need a long time to prepare that.
Okay. So, and how many visitors did you normally have in your institution there?
Before the lockdown, a little bit less than in the Children's Museum, than 100,000 visitors. And in the first year we had of the lockdown, we had 30,000 visitors. Also in the second year, it was not much better. But now we expect more visitors than before the pandemic. So our visitor numbers are really exploding in the moment. Yeah. So we will have a better result than before the pandemic this year.
Okay. Well, Alessandra, I saw you disappear for a while. I was anxious that you disappeared like for a while.
Yeah, because I'm sorry about this dark. But I was
really
trying to move. Yeah. And so it's incredible, very similar situation to the one that Jörg just described, because also in Italy and Città della Scienza, we have different lockdown. You know, maybe that Italy has been divided also in by region, with colors that allow or not to be open to school, cultural institution, and so on. So not all the museum and cultural institution had the same number of open day, but almost the 50% of museum in Italy had the opportunity to be open for 5 months in 2020. So taking account the first lockdown, and then in the 21 we had another lockdown, but then we reopened almost all together in the middle of the 21. But what was interesting about what said Jörg, that also in Italy we had this compensation by the government that put also the institution to face some decision, because in our case, when the institution decided to ask and for this compensation, it means that the workers accept to have the salary reduced, almost the same percentage, 70%, 80%. It depends from also the contract. And but in this case, the person that stay at home doesn't work, while what the institution can and could decide was to have some workers at home without working, and some workers at home working with full salaries, choosing which activities should go on and because necessary, and which one can be cut off, so without absolutely how to say lay off people, but for sometimes taking them at home with a reduced salary. So it was also in the team, you know, it's easy to understand that it was not an easy moment because some of us went on working for all the time, making very few days of this reduced salary covered by government, and some other one made long period of out of work paid by the government. And the decision was made, and I can make an example. For example, maybe someone knows our science festival, Futuro Remoto. And so in this case, we decide that in 2020, we immediately move our science festival online. So all the team working on the science festival was paid fully by the by Città della Scienza, that is a private institution, so this is important to say, and working in smart working. And some other one stay at home with the reduced salary, but then when the lockdown finished, everyone came back. Another things that happen is always because there were some contribution by the state, by the government, was to have some training program for workers that were some way out of work for some times. And so we organized this activity, so this training for the workers that had this period of reduced salary, really to not create, you know, a psychological and long separation by their community of Città della Scienza, by their work and tools and so on. So this, and also to organize the work at home. Also in this case, as Jörg said, we had a time to move also computer and so on from the office to the private home and so on. So we organized the work in this way.
So I know, and maybe it's a little bit separate from that, but only a number of years before, you had a big fire at the museum, and the museum burned down, and so you had to rebuild from that. So I wonder if anything that you had learned rebuilding from after that fire was useful for facing the next crisis, which was COVID.
Yeah, it's not to say it's not a good point too, but I would have to say that here we are very used to, you know, to face big trouble and crisis, and so our history is really has been a very always
dramatic.
Not really dramatic, but you know, with always big work and also problem and trouble to solve. So it's also in this case we went on the pandemic.
I was interested in what you were saying about the psychological support that you gave to the workers, and I've not heard that from the others before. I was wondering, before I go to Maria, if any of the former previous speakers had experienced the same thing. Did you put something in place to help and support the workers in that period? Yeah, Anne, maybe?
Yes, I think we had quite many supportive talks, chats with the staff to handle the situation and to stay calm and to find themselves in this very uncertain time.
Also at our place, and I think it really helped to we really made sure to connect to our staff enough. So send them letters, you know, through the director, or you know, try to find ways to connect. We created even a museum TV where people would film their situation at home and give a gym class, you know, to keep the sort of spirit going, or do a demo from their home, or a cooking class, or whatever they could do, and also to make sure that you wouldn't have to divide so much. You know, you want to create a sort of connection between the staff. So I think we really try to do both things.
Okay, good. Yeah, yo, sure, go ahead.
Of course, we also did, and I just want to talk about one aspect which was very interesting for us. Because of this positive situation that we had, this short time work in Austria, we really had to manage that we were confronted with the situation that all our workers were sitting at home, were paid, but they feel like workless. So they ask, this is they're paid, but they cannot do anything. So that this was a really stupid situation, because you would feel something, it could be comfortable to get money and you can do what you want, but you couldn't do, of course, anything. So people were really also frustrated about this situation. So that was very interesting. I mean, psychologically wise also.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we're gonna come back to all of that. Maria, you are not leading a museum right now, but you are an observer of the cultural world, at least in Portugal, if not beyond that. And so, what is your take on what happened during the COVID in the cultural world or in the museum world in Europe?
So yes, we're not a museum, we're a cultural organization. So we're following different situations, and the impact, the immediate impact the pandemic had on museums in Portugal was not very different from the one our colleagues shared. Perhaps it will make sense for me to share with you the two things that marked us the most at the time. Mm-hmm. The first thing was the shocking way museum mediators or educators were led off by some museums and other cultural organizations in Portugal. Total lack of empathy, of concern, of care, of love for people who were working for those organizations, some of them for 20 years without a proper contract, some of them again. So it looked like an easy thing to do, a thing we do maybe when we are panicking, but I think we should have shown more solidarity at the time and more maturity to deal with a situation that was unknown to many of us. I remember also that in July 2020, when the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco had to lay off some people for the first time, they tried to keep things going until then. I remember the touching, loving letter the director at the time, which was Deborah Cullinan, shared with the community, with all of us on the museum's mailing list, to explain what they had tried to do in the first months. And this included cuts at the higher levels of the hierarchy, including directors, to try to keep things balanced and to keep people in the team as long as possible. And then also the way she referred to those people as loving members of the family. And that was a huge contrast concerning what we were living in Portugal, what we were experiencing in Portugal. Then the other thing was how, because you said, Walter, a while ago that most museums had a strategy, a digital strategy, etc. I don't think so. Many museums have a digital presence. And many, they don't have a person who knows, who has the knowledge and the experience to have a strategy and to know what is the best way of using these means at our disposal. So I remember many colleagues sharing with us, because something we did as an association, we were discovering Zoom at the time. So for 2 months, we had late evening discussions online with anybody who cared to join from the cultural field, just to share anxieties and worries, etc. And I remember how many people were sharing with us how exhausted they felt by having to do something on the digital sphere, and not knowing well why they were doing it and for whom. And actually, another thing I remember from that time is a text by Nina Simon, who at the time was the director of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History in California. And she wrote a very good text at the time saying, who are we doing this for? Why? Who's asking for this? And what do people really need at this point? And this is a question I think most museums never ask themselves in Portugal. They had to be online because everybody was online, not knowing very well, you know.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to come back on that, because one of the big things that we have learned and what happened at the same time at the closing is the whole movement for inclusion and for anti-racism after the death of George Floyd. And there was a huge movement here to involve people from all origins into the museum, etc. And so I wonder, I know that happened in Europe as well. Is that been part of the rebuilding for you, the inclusive aspect of a museum for everyone, and everyone should be able to work in a museum, whoever they are, where they come from?
I can give some aspect on it.
Yeah, please.
First of all, our museums are based on collections from all over the world, and we need to work with the source communities on all the different continents. And during the pandemic, that was like cut off at the moment. So we needed to find new ways to work together and collaborate together on digital platforms, for instance. But I was surprised that we could keep on that work in that large extent as we did. And also to open up the museums and the public program for new audiences. We could see that the group of elder and people with different kind of disabilities was a group that really liked our virtual tours and digital tours. We could also see now that the level and the quality of the content, it's totally different expectations. What we could come through with at the first week, it would not be acceptable today, because people are expecting much higher quality and much higher and better designed and so to say. So, and we could also see now that people are making their bookings. They decide the same day if they should come to an event or be part of a digital lecture or so. So it's much more difficult to know in advance what is really going to be popular and attractive.
So we have two questions here: is whether digital strategies or not, whether they're good or not, is one aspect of it, and we can come back to that. But my question was more about the diversity aspect and how we rebuild, taking diversity into consideration when we were rebuilding. And so that's a very important thing here in the US. And I was wondering how much that is actually part of the strategy in your places as well, to make sure that that aspect then means not only hiring the diverse staff and giving people responsibility, but it also is what are the new audiences now that we need to address because of that. So that's, Marjolein, do you want to respond to that?
I think it's a very important issue in the Netherlands, and I think Europe-wide, diversity, inclusion, and equity. So think about who do you want to be for, and how does that affect your staff, your programs, your partners, everything. I am not sure if it's really related to COVID in any way. So I think it was already an issue before COVID, and it is still an issue. I do think that our field has developed a lot in that, and what we considered as being inclusive before COVID, we don't consider that being inclusive anymore. So we are more conscious because we've learned a lot. about this issue, and so we were conscious of how we are still incompetent and how we still have to work on being more inclusive in the way we work, etc. So yes, it's definitely part of our strategies of more museums, I think, not only our institute and my former institute, and also, but you see it really Europe-wide, at least in the science museums. But I think any museum, I mean, it's an issue like decolonization with regards to collections, for instance, is very important in my institute now, which was not an issue at our science museum because we didn't have a very colonial collection at all.
I'm looking at the. Oh yes, who wants to? I'm sorry, Alessandra, please.
If I can say something about this,
of course.
I agree with Marjolaine that it was an issue that for sure was at the core of, I think, the policies in our museum before the pandemic. But maybe what happened in these last 3 years, starting from the pandemic, that with these online activities, we really start to connect much more with an international dimension, all the with activities for all the year, not simple with some specific, event like we in the Science Center. We know that we have the Excite conference and some other moment. But when we started with also the festival that was with the international community, and then all the activities with international community, we really had the chance to also listen to experience, to the also main crucial point of other museums all around the world, and to feel how this issue was so strong all around the world. And so when Marjolaine said, for sure now we are much more conscious, because I think that when you see that this is something that in all geography is at the center of the programs, activities, policies, you really feel that you are on the right way, and that you have to work on that. That cannot be just one of the topic, one of the main education activities, but should be one of the main guideline of your policy. So this international dimension of the pandemic, I think, has been very, very important in a positive way, to be much more conscious on many level of topic and activities.
You raised your hand. Oh, I'm sorry, Jörg had raised his hand first.
No worry. I just want to add that I absolutely agree that this topic of inclusion and diversity is really becoming more and more important. I see it in so many projects in this museum I mentioned before. Museum is part of a retirement home, so it's the museum is directly built to a retirement home of old people, so where old people are living. So we had to work very hard on all this question about to read, to stay in the. People are not able to walk in the museum with cognitive disabling. So I mean, they're so this is so important, but I would agree, I don't see directly the relation to the pandemic here. So I mean, of course, maybe we are more open and more careful about everything what's happening around us, but I don't see directly for our work now the relation here. So because as a children's museum, we were already very open to all children. We tried to get all children and families in our museum. So I wouldn't say that there is something like something different in our work.
So the reason why I say that is, of course, I mentioned George Floyd here, but what the pandemic has done it is affected the poorest and the weakest part of the communities the hardest. And museums have been trying to do programs to reach out to these people in a different way, even if they were not in contact with them before. For example, opening the computer rooms for poor kids to have online classes. And that changed a lot of the vision that people had in museums about the role that they can play to help underserved communities and why diversity and things is so important. So that's why I mentioned that there is a connection from my point of view. But I see your point, but this is why I brought that up. So looking at the time, so this is a global question, and feel free to answer if you're okay with that. So I'm not going to go in order here. So,
but I think it's one of the most important questions that we have: how we should be more inclusive and how we should reach out to broader audiences and to also have them to work together with us. And it's not linked.
Sorry, there was
okay.
a part
it's
Walter's question we didn't address.
Wait, Maria, let her finish first.
Sorry.
Well, for us, it was not linked. I mean, that is our core business and our most important strategy. So it's not, it was not that directly linked to the COVID situation. We had to go on with that work.
Yes, okay.
Despite COVID.
Okay, Maria.
I think what I thought was really interesting in your question is how aware are we and concerned about people having the opportunity, a chance to work in this field. Because yes, we concentrate a lot on our relationship with audiences, the so-called audiences, but how can we address those people if our teams remain terribly homogeneous? And two things that came up in these last years, I don't know if directly linked to the pandemic or not, was the Black Union in the Arts in Portugal, which Black colleagues got together for the first time to get a different presence in the field. And I don't know if you know of a network in the UK called Museum as Muck, which is a network of working class people working in museums. And I think it's something interesting to follow. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So, time in mind, we have a picture of what happened, which was very diverse in many ways and very similar in others. But so I assume that you have been working, and you said that you have had discussions of what will the museum be looking after? What is it going to look the same as before? What do we want to change? And then a subsidiary question to that is, how did you involve your staff in the conversations about the future of your institution? Who is willing to come up with that first? Oh, difficult one, Marjolaine. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm really thinking very hard about this question. The situation in our case is that we really had to think very. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Well, maybe someone else can answer.
Yeah.
Maybe. Alessandra, do you want to answer? Oh, Anne. Okay, go Anne.
Yes, I mean, we made huge, very involving work where we involved all the staff before the pandemic in writing a strategy and a new vision for our museums, and that is to contribute to a bigger, more human and more inclusive world. So it's beautiful, and it fits really good in the post-pandemic situation that we have. And this is a couple of chapters that has to do with what we should contribute with, how we should work in collaboration, how we should involve for lifelong learning, etc., how we should be digital. And we could see that this work, now we are going to make it real, to turn it into action and to turn it into behavior also. And that is the ongoing work. And we could see that some of it we speeded it up with new learnings from the pandemic situation, and other things has been more complicated. But I think it's been a really involving work, and I'm happy to share it with you. And And for instance, we could see that lifelong learning has an extraordinary big importance now, because people, they want to go to the museum to meet. It should be a safe place for difficult questions. So we have an important function in the society for a sustainable society, and also to do things together, to build and to build new communities, to engage people. People want to be engaged in the museum.
Who else wants to jump on in here?
Yeah, I've had time to think about it now. Sorry. We had the situation that we had to restart completely, because by the time we had the lockdown, we actually were finishing our strategy. So we had to throw it in a bin, basically, and start all over again. So we took a long period, which was very insecure in the beginning. So at first, we started a whole discussion about what is really relevant for Institute. Not even only mission-based, but also revenue-based, because we were in a situation that we were so dependent on our own revenues, like I said. But then when our financial situation was a bit more secure, we could think more mission-based. And one of the things we added were 3 things, and it was related to what you said before. We, instead of only looking at our strategy from what we wanted to achieve, we had 3 very main themes overarching that we want to integrate. So that was diversity and inclusion, digitalization. So we, instead of just throwing on some online programs, really think about it from a strategic point of view, and sustainability. So those 3 issues were all of a sudden much more important after the COVID crisis.
Mm-hmm. So
how we involved staff was really through the whole process, actually. First only with the leadership team, then with all the a bit more senior staff, and then in smaller groups, in smaller teams. So we try to involve everyone.
Okay, thank you. I have Maria and then Alessandra on this topic.
Just to say quickly that I think two of the lessons many people said at the time of the pandemic, that came out of the pandemic, was that we were determined to work better on time management, and also the balance between work life and family life, and also having time to see what our colleagues are doing, because we're just producing. So everybody was very optimistic and determined, and then we went back to what it was, or even worse, in terms the rhythm with which museums produce, and not only museums, because we work with the whole culture sector. People are exhausted, more exhausted than they were before, without really knowing why we work like this. And also we have serious mental health issues. And at least in Portugal, this is not an issue I'm sorry, yet. This is not an issue yet. It's just starting now. So this is something that concerns us a lot.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to come back to that. Alessandra, on the original question, yeah.
Yeah, well, we also changed during the pandemic our governance. So, we had a big change inside the structure. And I have to say that also the way of working changed a lot, also because, as I think in many institutions, we went on also with some hybrid kind of smart working and working. And this changed a lot the way of, I think, a community work together. And at the same time, and I heard was the same for York, we have now more visitors than before the pandemic. So we have also to make new program, new activities for a bigger number of visitors, and this is a very good point. So I have to say that the big difference in the way of working was made by this kind of different organization of team with smart working and hybrid organization of work, and also in the in the planning of a much stronger program of activities for the general public, and while for the involvement of people from outside community and so on, I have to say that we had this tradition also before the pandemic. So on this point, I cannot see big change before and after the pandemic. So I have to say, I point out the smart working dimension, that for us, what's in some country, it was already used. In our place, absolutely, in our situation, in our institution, it's something completely new, coming out from the pandemic and not known before.
Jo, do you want to contribute to that question, or?
Of course, I can also say, I agree a little bit to Alessandra, so that or have the same experiences. I mean, there was, of course, we feel a strong impact of the pandemic, or after the pandemic now, in the work situation, because we have already still to manage the situation between home office and working in the office. I mean, there is and it was a really strange at the beginning, because of course the people are working in the workstation, they couldn't stay at home and do something like homework, they had to go in the workstation. Some part of the scientists could of course stay at home and work there, but now we feel that all our staff, for example, try to work again in the office. They sometimes use the opportunity to work for at home. But I mean, and this is something like the organizational part. And the other one is that we had a lot of discussion, of course, about when I was talking that we did some online formats, discussion with parents, and of course a little bit we are still doing, but we had immediately this discussion: do we want to get our visitors back in the museum, or do we want to invest a lot of money also in this online format? And of course the situation is, because of now of another situation of the inflation, of course it's definitely difficult now. Money-wise, I would say more difficult than it was in the pandemic for us. And so we have to decide if we go more back in what we did in the past. So of course with some adaptations maybe, but now we are really, I mean, I feel that we are doing the right thing, because all these visitors are coming back in the museum, and we try to organize one online exhibition, an interactive online exhibition, but it was a lot of investment for us to do that, and it also cost us several months to prepare that. And I think, of course, additionally, we think we can do that, but I think our main focus is on the museum now back.
So thanks. That's a perfect segue for the last part that I wanted to address. And Anju may be able to answer within that section, you know, because I want to give time for you to answer questions, because there's a lot of questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that we can go to that as well. So the last thing is about the workforce today, because we as museum experts, we have noticed a lot of changes going on, and very important ones. So first, and it's probably not totally similar with the European situation, but you tell me. So first of all, people who have been laid off are not rehired, mostly. Museums are looking for other types of skills than they had looking before. More people coming out of management and business type of things, rather than coming out of the school of museum, you know, or the university programs. They are looking more for management type, more for younger people with less experience, because rather than senior people, etc. So we have a lot of changes in the workforce, and at the same time, the workforce with there feels very stressed, and there is a lot of burnout going on in the museums, because people do more with less resources. They have to do more things, that are not in the field that they were hired for. They feel left out in the conversation about where the institution is going. And they feel underpaid and they feel not respected for all the work that they've been doing. So that's a very serious problem here in the US, at least, that there is a lot of burnout and a lot of stress in the workforce. So I want to have that conversation, want to see if that goes on with if we have the same experience as well. And then secondly, what we hear from the leadership side is something that you just mentioned, is there is this big ask now in the field for people to have more chance for hybrid work and to work from home. And because of the inflation, people want raises of salaries, which is on the CEO side very difficult problems to face. So we have these two sides where there is a big stress within the workforce because they're not doing exactly what they expected to be doing, and they feel that they are not respected for that. And on the CEO side, on the director side, the fact that they have really financial constraints that become more and more difficult because of the pandemic, and also they have trouble handling the request for hybrid work. So this is the situation here. So how do you feel about that? Do you see similarities or is it different? Who is gonna, Anne, do you want to jump in that?
Yes, I can try to. I think I start at the end. I don't think we have the same situation in Sweden as in the US when it comes to burnout. Not yet. But we could see as an organization that we pulled so many projects. So we have a great need of catching up with the development when it comes to new exhibitions, for instance. So I think it's a big stress for the whole organization and this income generating side of it. But today we have the possibility for the staff to work on distance 2 days, maximum 2 days a week, if they sign an agreement on that. We could see that also the staff, they have new habits. They bought dogs, started gardening, moved out of city maybe. And it's in many ways, it opened up for better solutions to connect, to combine the working life and your private life. But we could also see that some of the staff, and also with problematic situations, they go under the radar, so to say. And it's very difficult to be leading this team, to get the team together, to develop the team. The creativity is losing, is suffering from this. So really? I think we came to the point that we want people back to the office right now to get people together. It's difficult to be a supportive manager, leader also when you have people on the distance. And then I could also add that the first question then that we could see a very big difference in needs from the schools. Needs. It's like a new landscape. They are really under pressure. They need to catch up in the classroom. It's more regulated. It's more anxiety in the classroom. So, and it's also digital fatigue, they are exhausted, digitally exhausted. So we could see that we need to rethink once again to be more responsive to their needs, more hybrid solution based on the specific class needs. So it could be online material and a chat combined with a chat, or they want to come here, but they think it's difficult to leave the school in the classroom. So we need to rethink again. And we could also see that the group of educators are divided with the more specialized in the digital content and the old school, but both those skills are needed. So it's an art form to cherish, to meet the class in the museum.
So someone wants to jump on that conversation here? how do you feel the workforce is doing these days in your institution? Do you feel the stress? Do you work with them on that? Or yes,
I think what I really see in my organization, that there are two things have coming a big impact from the pandemic. First is that I think after the pandemic now we have to manage more things than before. We have all these online meetings and additionally on-site meetings, and I think we do more projects than before. And this is, I think, the same people have to do more things at the same time. So this is really one impact. This is enormously. I think the speed, the tempo, it was growing enormously. And the second one, I think, is I think everybody made this experience that, and I think Anne said it at the beginning, that there is a totally new relationship between work and free time at the same time. So because a lot of our employees ask also after the pandemic that they don't want to work full time anymore, they just want to work part time, they want to work only 50%, because they, of course, they made the experience that there is more than only work in their life. There is there's a new quality also of life, and this is also something hard for us, because there was a time after the pandemic it was really hard to get new stuff because everybody had the same problem. It's now a little bit, I think, better. This question, but I think we have to still manage this situation between work-life balance. I always prefer now to say more life than work balance, and I think this is really something, a totally new situation for us.
Yeah, Marjolaine, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think we have a similar situation whereby people prefer to work from home more than before, or at least more get the opportunity, maybe as well. I think that the whole idea of hybrid working changed also on a leadership level, I would say, that we now have tools that we can actually do it, and we have protocols and all kinds of things. But I do think there's a lot of stress with staff, maybe not so much now than a year before, but the constant stress of reopening was very, very severe, I must say, especially for people on the floor, you know, who had to work with visitors. That was super stressful, especially after a reorganization where we had really, I mean, the minimum amount of staff that we needed to reopen. So that was really a challenge for them. And they've been angry about that, and I can understand that as well. So that stress, but also the stress from people working from home, for instance, from the education staff, you know, constantly being creative, developing new stuff, trying to be more relevant for their audiences. And I think everybody was, in our situation, very insecure for a long time because of layoffs. They were afraid that we would have to do it again, which was not the case, but still, we really had to reassure them constantly that this was not the case, that we were financially sound again, that we didn't have to do it. So that insecurity was very severe, I would say. And I think that stressed a lot of people. And something that wasn't mentioned before, but which had a lot of impact, and also in my current institute, is long COVID. So a lot of young people that suffer from long COVID and are not able to work again. So it or not full time, or maybe you know, have trouble with their energy level. So that is still a situation that we have in our institute, especially in the museum. So the museum staff that work with audiences.
Thank you. Any other comment on this before I go to the questions?
Well, I just can say that I can consider now a good moment compared to the stress and also the angry people of the pandemic. period. And about the smart working, I don't know in the other country how it works, but here in Italy, for some categories, you can obtain the smart working. It's not your museum, your institution that can decide, but this is for specific categories like families with children under 12 years old, but it's a big number of workers that can have the smart working, like also people with some health problem, while each museum and institution can make then a specific contract agreement with inside the institution for smart working for all the workers. And in this case, for example, Città della Scienza didn't do this agreement, so want people to stay in presence on site at Città della Scienza. But we have many workers that can, and you are using the smart working because they can do it for the national law. And I think this is always help, you know, like the compensation we had for all the cultural institutions during the pandemic. But what I can see for sure is that, as Jörg said, we haven't had people asking for part-time and things like this, because it means to have the salary reduced. But for sure, at the 8 hours per day that we have of works now are really respected. So we really work from 8:30 to 5 o'clock, almost all the workers, while before I remember that was very, very normal to stay here, a big number of workers very late in the evening and so on. So we become for sure much more regular, but I can say maybe sometimes also effective in our work. So we gain something to our free time and life. So in this sense, I can say maybe we are not, we are in a good moment in terms of stress.
Great, thank you so much. Colleen, I've seen in the chat a number of questions coming on, and please, I'm sure you have distilled something out of that, so go ahead.
Sure. So first, on behalf of all of our attendees, want to just say thank you to our panelists, because there have been some really fascinating chats around a lot of your comments. So first, thank you. Secondly, so I'm going to jump between a couple of questions. Rita and Thaddeus both had some similar questions around your workforce. Can you share with us the percentage of your workforce that is hourly, either before COVID, after COVID? And also, we have this concept of being furloughed in the US versus laid off. When you're furloughed, your position is held, often you're not paid, but then the idea is that you're supposed to be brought back later on when the museum can afford to bring you back. And we had several institutions that furloughed staff and then at the end just laid them off. So we were curious, of the people that you let go for whatever reason, whether it was furloughed or laid off, how many of those came back after you reopened? So what percentage of your workforce is hourly, and what was the furlough or laid off rehire situation when you reopened? Does that make sense?
I cannot answer. I don't know. I'm not
go ahead. Yeah, go.
But the second, the percentage we rehired, none. And not because we didn't want to, but they all got a new job, which is good for them.
In Sweden, this is quite strictly regulated. If the same position is, I mean, free, again, you have some kind of priority. But I think the most important thing was that we needed a new kind of competence. So when we launched new positions, it was also with another demand of competence. So
yeah. So and several of you mentioned that you had like Jörg in particular. It's not furlough because people were staying home, but they were paid, right, while they were staying home, and then they came back. So.
Correct. Correct. And I know Maria has to jump off soon. So before she has a very strict end time for us. Maria, did you let go of any staff and did you bring any back?
It's not our case because the staff is me and our secretary. So we kept working.
It wasn't an issue.
And we did, as we invest a lot on training for museum professionals and cultural professionals, we started doing everything online and we were very busy. So we kept our collaborators working as well. So it's very different for our kind of organization. Yeah.
I understand. One other question that came up a couple of times between Lori and Rita was, as you were discussing your digital or virtual presence and trying to create online programs for visitors to engage with, has that caused the acceleration of any other plans? And likewise, have you maintained the same level of digital presence now that you've reopened? Any thoughts?
In our case, it became a very important part of the strategy to create an overarching digital strategy. So instead of doing separate online presence programs, it became part of our overarching strategy. So yes, and in both the institutes where I think the most relevant thing we did online was creating programs for schools online, which was really helpful for schools because they were very stressed about the online schooling they had to do. So it was really good for them that we could take over some of these classes and do online demonstrations, and we continued doing that in my current institute.
And also for Città della Scienza is the same, and but now we still have the online activities on our catalog, but I have to say that no one choose them. They absolutely prefer schools and general visitors to come here in the museum. And sorry, I maybe I interrupt Jörg, sorry.
Right, Jörg, go ahead.
I just want to repeat that we made this experience with an online exhibition. It was something like an online adventure, what we developed. And of course, we would like to go further with this idea to develop also a new project like this one. But at the same time, we made the experience, of course, we had to invest a lot of money in projects like this one. And at the same time, I don't have the resources in the moment because we have all the old programs, what we did in the past. So creating new exhibitions, workshops in the museum, and of course our traveling exhibition. But of course we would like to do there more, but there is, I don't see any opportunity in the moment to have resources, money and staff for doing more in this field in the moment.
Okay,
maybe a last question, Colleen?
All right. We had one final one jump in from Pietra online. Seems like we're very interested in Marjoleen's TV museum and whether or not that was strictly for internal use or did you share that externally within the community?
Yeah. No, in this case, it was really for the museum staff to stay connected and to each other and to the museum. So we really created it for ourselves in this case, and it was very personal as well, which could be interesting for the community. But in this case, people would show their own places. And like I said, the chef of our restaurant did a cooking course and somebody did gymnastics class and stuff like that. So it was really, very personal and very small in a way for ourselves. Yeah. But it was very, very fun, very nice.
And so for us in museumexpert.org, we have never met in person. This organization exists with all volunteers that have never met in person, but still. So this was fascinating, and thank you so much for joining and accepting our invitation to discuss these topics. I'm sure a lot of our viewers have new insights in what you are doing there and what your opportunities and difficulties are, and that inspired them for their own work here, maybe in the US. this is being recorded, so later then you can share that with whoever you think it's worth sharing, because that's big part of this online dimension of our work now, is that everything is accessible all the time. So please make sure to share that. So thanks to the panelists for joining us. Thanks to Colleen for being behind the scenes organizer of this, and thanks to our audience for being to fight the digital fatigue that we mentioned earlier and stay with us at the end. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Take care.